What's up, everybody? It's your boy Royster here, and I'm here with the second chapter of a video series in which I am sort of chronicling my life, or some of the details of my life, kind of giving you more of a broad overview and maybe some of the high spots of my life over the past 27 years or so. And and most of that will then obviously I'm keying in or focusing on my encounter with Jesus and what that has looked like for me as I had that encounter, and since that encounter have been forever changed and have seek to live out a life in pursuit of Christ and knowing Him and understanding Him and following Him and then living in a way that I feel that He calls His disciples to live. So that's kind of going to be a focus of these Chronicles, is kind of to sort of point out that'll be sort of a central theme, not only just kind of talking about myself, but referring to Jesus and showing and pointing out how He's been in my life and the impact He's made on my life. So I already did the first video, or the first chapter, and that was a video that I simply kind of just talked about my relationship to the church as a youngster, how I kind of grew up, and so there was those foundations that were laid. But then I gave an account of my ultimately my conversion, or my rebirth, so to speak, as a 13-year-old. I kind of did the math and looked it up since that last video, and so yeah, I'm pretty confident I was 13 years old. So I gave the account of how I came to Christ and came to know Him, and that's kind of where I left you off, and that is where I'm going to pick up from. So, obviously, as I gave account of my conversion and how that even affected me the night of and the coming days, as far as just seeing the new changes and just how I thought inside. I think the biggest thing for me, I think when you think about it, I can't say that I became this super overt Christian, at the age of 13, or this passionate, on fire Christian. I think the biggest thing that came about as a result of my conversion, as a result of my confessing of my sins and turning my heart over to the Lord and receiving His free gift of salvation, was more, I was definitely more sensitive to right and wrong, and definitely had a heart to want to do what was right and abstain from what was wrong, because I wanted to maintain a good relationship with God, because that was what kind of led me to that moment, was the belief or recognition that I was separate, because my sins did separate me. And so I didn't want to be separate from God or hurt that relationship. I guess that's the best way, this 41-year-old mind can kind of translate that 13-year-old mindset from back then. But anyways, but also I think a big thing was I was more God conscious. I think there was a God consciousness that was really birthed in me, that wasn't even with going to church and things like that, though there was the knowledge, or I believed in God and the knowledge of God, but can't say that I really had that huge God consciousness, and I think that really awoken within me as a result, and which would make sense, because if you believe as I believe, that upon rebirth the Spirit of God comes and abides within you, so that's going to change how you live, or how you perceive God, or perceive the world, or how you live. It's going to change things, in those ways. So, but I think that's the biggest thing, but I kind of kept on with that, kind of, for the most part, I kind of, outside of making a few changes, kind of lived a normal sort of teenage life, I guess, for the most part. I, just continued to pursue the activities I enjoyed and I liked, as long as I, felt comfortable with them or didn't have any objection to them. But I think one of the sweetest things I think I remember, as far as relationship wise with God, I think with that God consciousness came like before I even understood the whole idea of having a relationship with God, or at least that was like became a big thing down the road, was that I genuinely did have a relationship with God. I kind of bought in, at least like with childlike innocence, I guess, just believing that God lived in me and I could communicate with Him, and I didn't necessarily have like regimented prayers or anything of that sort, even at that age that I remember. It was more like when I was walking to and from school, I would talk with God. I just kind of talked with Him. It was very simple and sincere, and just a genuine time, and I would just talk to Him about whatever was on my heart or what was on my mind. And that's kind of something even to this day that's kind of still instilled in me, even going back to those days, because there was a sweetness about that time in my life. But unfortunately, I don't know, like, I didn't become, I would say though, during this time as I, continued, 13-year-old, I was 8th grade, and then obviously from 8th grade, 9th grade, was getting to high school and things. But I can't say though, unfortunately for me, that I really buried my roots deep in my faith, so to speak. Like, I didn't do a lot of Bible reading, or I went to church and things and took in what I took in there, but it wasn't like something where I just really like dug into it. It was kind of like this event happened, these changes happened, and I would kind of live now with sort of like this God consciousness and reality, and wanted to all I know is I had this relationship and I wanted to do right by God, but I also realized, unfortunately, over time, and I think some of this, because I didn't put those roots down and didn't understand a little bit more or about the importance of that, is like over time, I started to let things into my life that weren't good for me, that weren't healthy for me. And I would say for the most part, that was just entertainment, kind of as a kid, I always, early on, and, loved action movies and things like that. And so I still and I can't remember how much of that stuff I kind of shed off me for a time or a season, to what degree, but I do know that ultimately I still either let that stuff back in or I embraced it more over time, as far as movies go, like a lot of rated R movies. I liked action and violence and things like that, and so those appeals to me, I would let those things in and watch those things against my better judgment. And obviously then also too, that I became passionate about music. I kind of grew up initially as a kid in that MTV generation where you watched a lot of music videos and whatnot on TV, especially through your summer break. And but that was kind of there, but I was never listened to the mainstream radio. But I can't say I was passionate about music, but I would say as I grew older, music started to play a big part in my life. I kind of got introduced into like the grunge and alternative metal scene. Grunge, alternative metal scene. It was kind of a progressive thing, started with like, the Stone Temple Pilots and Soundgarden and those kind of bands, and into Bush and, the popular alternative bands. And then next thing you know, I'm listening to Korn and Seven Dust, Limp Bizkit, Cold Chamber, all those new metal bands coming out. And so I think, there was reservation initially, but I kind of really enjoyed that stuff as they progressed. And even though that I knew that there was content that was not healthy for me or for my spirit, and I knew that, like, based upon like convictions inside, I didn't feel good about either watching certain entertainment or listening to it or listening to certain music, but I still did it anyways because I enjoyed it. So I was as you know, Scripture would tell you, I was sowing to the flesh rather than the spirit. And so over time, when one does that, their heart starts to become desensitized to the movings and promptings of God within the heart, and you become less in tune, and your heart becomes hardened, and and that's what was kind of happening to me over time, and I didn't realize it. I still tried to live kind of like but I was making those little compromises, through my life, and it was over time making changes, because little compromises lead to bigger and bigger and bigger compromises. And basically that's what happened as I continued to go through high school and grow, kind of mature and things like that. I started to get involved in other things, and again, compromise after compromise. And though I never gave up my faith in God and always knew about that, kept that reality of Him in my life, and I kind of, try to live a good moral life, at least surface-wise. I was a good student, I was kind of generally an A student, and, didn't really break any rules. I went to the principal's office once, I think, in that whole time I was in high school. And but anyways, I was kind of sort of like, so I was kind of like treading this line and walking this line for a long time. And but anyways, over time, the more compromises led to bigger compromises, and then basically I fell onto the other side of the fence, and essentially, I guess the term would be I backslid or had backslidden, but in a way that was kind of subtle and unknown. Not like there was this dramatic event where I said, okay, I'm turning my back on you, God, and I'm going to pursue what I want to pursue and do what I want to do. So I can't say that there was any moment. It was just kind of a subtle thing. But so let's kind of fast forward, kind of give you a backdrop. Well, that kind of gives you a sense of my state of being and things like that. And as I was towards the end of my senior year, I started to kind of, now I always kind of had some like compulsive OCD kind of thinking about me, and I was always kind of sort of a fearful kid, growing up, about just all kind of different things. But anyways, I did, but nothing that ever really affected me drastically. But I started to develop some kind of little bit more severe OCD patterns and mindsets towards the end, but nothing that really affected me greatly at that time, so to speak. And I graduated high school, and then heading into that I graduated in 1998, and so heading into the summer of 98, I was working, I was working at a grocery store, had a girlfriend and had some good friends, and was on course to go to community college at the beginning to kind of, figure out what I was going to do in life. But, that was the route I was going. But over that summer, I don't know, this thing, these mindsets, these OCD mindsets, they really just kind of, best way I can say, they just dug in. They really just dug in, and they took in roots in my mind, and it became miserable. Life became miserable. And I'll probably do another video kind of detailing the OCD and some of that, because that's been something that hopefully maybe in sharing my accounts and will benefit people. But for now, just know that basically these mindsets became debilitating, to the point where I was struggling to be able to function in life, and was hindering me. And so eventually, because of it, I quit my job, broke up with my girlfriend, started to see my friends less and less, and of course their lives were taking different courses too, but yeah, all these things kind of like happened there in the summer of '98 to the point then basically I struggled to function outside of my home, so I could like only go out for a limited amount of time before I would have anxiety and panic and just kind of like nervous breakdowns. And then I would, at its worst, it got to the point where I struggled to be able to function in my own home. And so I essentially became bedridden because that was the only place that I could sort of be safe from my mind, right? Because then I didn't have to deal, like when you get at with the type of OCD and the things that was going on in my mind, most of it, just in brief, had to do with kind of like cleanliness and things like that. And it's a whole weird thing. Again, I'll break it down somewhere else. But like, if I was in bed, I didn't have to go deal with all these thoughts, intrusive thoughts and invasive thoughts bombarding me and having to deal with them. And so I was like, that's my safe space, basically. And so while I was essentially bedridden, not because of a physical infirmity, but more of a mental infirmity, my mom and her just kind of, sort of in just this way, and I don't know if it just was kind of simple in that she kind of just came in full of love, was just kind of like, hey, if you're going to be there, lay in bed or spend so much time there, why don't you read this, and she gave me a Bible, and thankfully it was a Good News Bible, so the translation was pretty easy, and again, even though I had that experience with God, when I was 13, and it was real and genuine to me, and I had that God consciousness and a love for God and had this relationship with Him, but I can say I never really ever read the Bible and whatnot. So what a revelation, right? As far as something that should come so natural, or should be so natural in that evolution. But anyways, as I was in kind of this bad spot, though, I started reading. I started in the New Testament with the Gospels, which, are the accounts of Jesus' life when He was on this earth. And man, I just tell you what, as I read the scriptures, I can't say I understood it all, but most of them are a story, right? Stories with lessons. But all I know is I just fell in love with Jesus. Like the scriptures, when people talk about the scriptures being alive and living, I mean, I'm full in, but like, here's an account where like I saw that firsthand, or know that to be true firsthand. That is, it was just like His life just like popped out of those pages, and His love and His person, and I just fell in love with Jesus, and I fell in love with Him. And obviously then that caused me to take note of my condition. Like, okay, yeah, I'm in a bad spot and doesn't seem like I'm going to get any help. So obviously usually it takes a lot of people to be in those situations to even think about God or consider God. And obviously I had that experience with Him and had that connection previous to that. And so obviously, I recognized, what had happened, so to speak. I recognized that I had backslidden, that I had fallen away from the Lord, and that and I had compromised on so many points, and a lot of that probably had some to do with where I was at, and so where I got to, and in that bad spot, and I just recognized that, and then basically just recognizing that and confessing my sins to God, like God, like I recognize that I've fallen away from You. I haven't been serving You, and I see my sin, and I see the separation, and God, forgive me. And I, based on Jesus, what He did, believing that His sacrifice was still, like I was able to receive again, hit the forgiveness of my sins and being made right with God, I took those steps, and I invited Jesus to come back and to be the Lord over my heart, over my life, and he did, and he responded, and what a great peace came to me. Now my situations didn't change as far as my mental and all that, but I at least was relieved again to know that I had found forgiveness and was made right with God, and I was thankful for that. But so then I decided to take some steps, and contacted my pastor at that time, the pastor I had known and had grew up with for most of my life, and called him. Don't know how much he was aware of all my situation. He just probably thought, oh, he's absent from church, because, people probably could see some of the radical changes. Not too radical, but some of the changes from as I, grew up as a teenager and a high schooler. But, just assumed. But anyways, I called him and said, hey, this is what happened, this is my situation, kind of giving a sense of the OCD and the debilitating nature, and then telling him my decision to surrender my heart over to the Lord and whatnot, and kind of just seeking counsel. And he said, oh, well, why don't you come to the next Bible study? It was going to be a Wednesday night Bible study, and Wednesday night Bible studies are simply that. People would come and they would read the Bible. We'd come and listen to the pastor teach about the Bible, and listen. And it wasn't necessarily there wasn't usually even any music or anything like that. And that was the focus. So, kind of sort of, especially a nondescript service, I guess. I don't know. But anyways, obviously God can show up when and wherever he chooses. So now I had the challenge, though, to making it to church, right? I had the challenge for me to be able to get out of my bed, to be able to get cleaned up, to get through these stages, all these obstacles, get out of my house. I knew I was going to be out for an hour plus, to make those steps to get out and get to church, and I didn't know what was going to happen, if anything was going to happen, but there was just a faith in my heart that said I needed to be there. And so, I account my story, looking back, and as I've reflected on this, and obviously, being familiar with scriptures more and more through the years, I really think of the story and the account in the Bible about the woman with the issue of blood, and her story and her account where, she did anything and everything she could to solve this matter, and none of it worked, and there was no solution. And so obviously, as Jesus was on the earth, and his testimony was going out to the people, I'm sure she heard about him, and in desperation it's like, I got to go see this man. I got to, and in sort of a faith pursued him, went through all these obstacles, that she had to navigate to get to him. But and in the end, she touched the hem of his garment, and she was forever transformed. She was, she was healed at the moment. And, and obviously the story counts, Jesus, notices what happened, and, lets her know, like, basically your faith has healed you, and so I think for me that was kind of what happened, or what was going on, a similar experience. Not that I was thinking of that story at that time, but for those of you familiar with scripture, I very connect this particular testimony in that way. So by God's grace and help, I make it to, through all the obstacles, I make it to church. And so with that scene, obviously the pastor seeing me present there then made the church kind of aware of my situation. And I don't think he went into great depth, but, and just had the congregation come and pray over me. And, and I've really loved this congregation, even as growing up, and And a lot of these people were near and dear to my heart, even at that point, and still are to this day, and will always be. So they came and they laid their hands on me, like circled and prayed, and it was started to pray for me. And I tell you what, it was like the power, the presence of God like fell on me at that moment in a way like I'd never experienced. And it was a very definitive moment that like I knew I already had a strong belief, right, that God was real, Jesus was real, because of my conversion experiences and whatnot. But this was a transforming moment in my life where it was like the power, the presence of God like just fell upon me. And the best I can describe it is it was like all those chains, all those entanglements in my mind, that like those mindsets of OCD that like were so like, it was just like those chains and those imprisonments were like broken as this presence came from like top down, sort of just flowed from the top down through me. And it just was like I was set free. Like he just set me free and empowered me to walk out of that prison that had been my mind. And it was a miracle. It was for me, because without God, I don't think I would have ever been able to escape those prisons in my mind, or that without probably going to a doctor and seeing a psychiatrist and getting on drugs of some sort. I don't know what that course would have looked like, and I know, but all I know is the reality of God's presence falling on me at the moment that these people laid their hands upon me and were praying for me, and the power of God just coming upon me, and the freedom and the peace that came to my mind as a result, will forever resonate with me, and has been a landmark moment that I can never ever deny the reality of God as a result of this moment, along with other things that had happened previous and even things to come. But this moment was a landmark moment for me, and it changed my life. It changed the trajectory of my life. And so that became basically, that sort of was a landmark to kind of put the cap on some events that led me to where I backslid, fell away. Now I came back, and now he intervened in my midst to deliver me. And so with that, I'm going to kind of wrap things up, because then I'm going to talk about my life moving forward after these events. It wasn't all, still there was a lot to do, a lot to hardships to face. And, but man, what a great, the next chapter of my life, I would say, is probably the time of my life I have the fondest thoughts and memories of, and when I reflect upon. But I'm going to say that for another chapter. So please feel, if you enjoy just hear me kind of share about my encounter of God, please be sure to tune in or be looking for that video when that comes. If you didn't listen to the first video, feel free to go back and check that out. This will all be in a playlist for people to just kind of be able to watch in succession. And and I hope to make some other content outside of just talking about my Chronicles, so to speak. And again, if you want to see more about the fun side, I mean, not that this is more serious in depth. If you want to see more, head over to my channel, Who is Royster, and there you got a plethora of different things and hobbies and interests that I'm kind of showcasing over there. But hey, thanks for watching this video, and like, comment, subscribe, do what you feel you need to do. Share this video to those you think might benefit from it. But again, thank you, and take care, and God bless. Peace.